Thokozani. My name is Zanemvula, and I am, I guess, what you would call an African traditional healer. But I tend to shy away from the term traditional healer because my calling in itself hasn't been so traditional. My guides led me in a very weird direction that I worried that no one was going to take me seriously, because astrology is a Western pseudoscience. A Western pseudoscience that is developed from an African science. And I learned this throughout my initiation. It started with me just being fascinated by the sky. I spent a lot of time just watching the stars, reading up on the constellations, and trying to understand why the stars move the way that they do. And through dreams and visions, I realized that I was actually being called to learn and understand the way that the cosmos works. And that the way that it's explained to us in the Western world is a watered down and simplified version of what our ancestors innately knew. And they had a very advanced way of teaching cosmology, of understanding the cosmos. And it was a timekeeping system. More than anything, it was how they tracked time. It was how they knew when to sow, when to harvest. It's when they knew when to celebrate the beginning of a solar cycle. Ultimately, in our blood runs the DNA of solar worshippers. A solar worshipper is somebody who worships the sun. Our ancestors believed that the sun was God because the sun gives life, the sun sustains life, and it holds the solar system together. Without the sun, everything perishes. And we didn't have this understanding that we have today of God being a man. God was a system, a creation system that contained masculine and feminine energy. So it was the divine masculine and the divine feminine. And the masculine was represented by the sun, and the feminine was represented by the moon. And this is fire, earth, and water, and air. So with all of these elements, we had the creation cycle. And the creation cycle is what governs our creation and where we come from and where we're going. So everything was cyclical. The conquering of Egypt by Alexander the Great, when the Greeks moved in and the Romans moved in, and Egypt or Kemet became a Roman empire. This is when we began to see Greek philosophers emerge, and these philosophers were students of African teachers, African leaders, African scientists. I'm going to emphasize two monuments, two of my favorite monuments that will help also to illustrate the point that I want to make today. First, we have Inzalo Yelanga. Inzalo Yelanga is a term that was coined by the great Sanusi, Ubaba Credo Mutwa. Western scientists call it Adam's calendar. Adam's calendar is a rock formation in Mpumalanga that illustrates the solstices and the equinoxes, right? These are the four most important days of the year. The new year for us occurs on the 21st of September. This is our spring equinox. Equinox is a Latin word that means equal night, and that's the first point in the year when the day and night are equal, and this is what kicks off the new year. Everything greens again in spring. It's new life, rebirth. That's when we begin the solar cycle, because our year is governed by the solar cycle. Then we have the solstices. The solstices are the peaks of the year. So the summer solstice is the hottest day of the year and the longest day of the year, and the winter solstice is the coldest day of the year and the shortest day of the year. And when you go to visit Inzalo Yelanga, it's in Mpumalanga. Inzalo Yelanga, by the way, directly translates to English as birth of the sun. Mpumalanga also means sunrise. So through our language, you're also able to understand how important the sun was to our spirituality and our way of life, and how nature was God to us. Nature, in ancient Medu Neter, that's the ancient language of Kemet, gods were called Neter, which directly translates to nature, principles of nature, because our gods were principles of nature. My second favorite monument that I want to get into, because these monuments contain valuable and valid information, vital information about who we are. And it's really important that we know who we are. And this was then what I discovered in my journey, that it was part of my calling. Although a traditional healer, we know a traditional healer heals ngamathambo, ngemithi, siyahlahluba, so we do bone divinations and we administer roots and herbs to heal people, and I love to do that. It's like, it's so cool. I enjoy it so much. But when I started out doing it, I always felt like there was something missing. A fundamental part of that healing process that I felt, for me, there was something missing in order for it to be a radical healing experience. I felt it was really important for people to know themselves. And my guides constantly led me to astrology, but the purest form of astrology, which is within cosmology and the way that our ancestors understood it. And so this is what brought me to this point of information gathering and understanding why is it that we misunderstand astrology so much, and why is it that we look at it as a Western pseudoscience rather than the origins of where it comes from, and understanding that it is an African science, an African art form, and an African knowledge system, a timekeeping system, right? One of the other African monuments that details this, and I love this one because it's so detailed, is the ancient Dendera in Egypt. It's not in Egypt anymore. French invaders stole it with gunpowder and explosives and took it to the Louvre Museum in Paris, so you can find it there now if you're ever interested. That is the original zodiac wheel, like the first ever astrological zodiac wheel, and it's an African illustration. And it's so sophisticated that zodiac wheels that we look at today are not nearly as detailed as that one is. The ancient Dendera describes two forms of reading the cosmos, of understanding the cosmos and tracking the cosmos. And it actually tells us that we have two sun signs and not one. So I always thought I was a Taurus. I always grew up identifying as a Taurus. Through my study of the ancient Dendera, I discovered two things. That I have two star signs, or I have two sun signs, as we all do, and that one of them was Aries. I didn't accept it for a long time until I read up on the natural principles of Aries and what Aries actually is. Aries is the original name for Aries is Asa. It's named after a constellation that our ancestors called Asa. We also know Asa as in Singuni as Umvelinqandi or Uqamata, the first emergence. He's symbolized by the sun, is also symbolized by the spring equinox. The natural principles of Asa, because he is represented by the spring equinox, the beginning of the year, the true beginning of the year. Someone that is born within that season becomes a natural leader, a natural innovator, because you represent the principle of beginning the year. So you begin the natural cycle. So in life, you become the person that begins things. You're the one that has new ideas. You're the one that then has like the urge to lead and the urge to innovate. You're the one that wants to make the biggest changes, because that's the natural energy that you were born into. And that's how our ancestors illustrated all of our sun signs, especially when it came to the seasons that we were born into, because you take on the energy of that season. If you're born during the season of the winter solstice, that's the darkest time of the year. So that then makes you the kind of person that is maybe a bit of a loner and likes to stay inside and doesn't really talk much, and also is very introspective and who likes to do a lot of research because you live in your mind and you don't verbalize a lot of things, but it makes you very introspective, very insightful, very wise as well. And I'm very comfortable with darkness and with solitude. These are all principles that were detailed in the ancient Dendera, and how the seasons affect the people, especially the seasons that they're born into. The second sun sign that we all have is determined by which constellation that the sun is in when we're born. And I know this can be confusing, but the simplest way to understand it is that the season that we're born into is not always the same as the constellation that the sun is in at the time. Because our ancestors understood the complex nature of the constellations, which is that they're not all the same size. Like Pisces is this big, and then Taurus is like this small. So there's no ways that the sun is going to be in Taurus the same amount of time that it's going to be in Pisces, because the sun doesn't speed up, it just moves at the same pace. When I was born, the sun was in Aries. It wasn't in Taurus the way that I thought it was, but I was born into the season of what we would say is the season of Taurus. And it gets further complicated because, like we all know, the northern hemisphere and the southern hemisphere don't have the same seasons. When we have spring, that side they have, what? Winter. Autumn. Thank you. When we have spring, they have autumn. When we have winter, they have summer. If you're born in the winter solstice in the northern hemisphere, and someone is born at the same time as you in the southern hemisphere, they're born during the summer solstice. Those are two completely different energies, and it's very important to take note of that, because it means that Taurus in the northern hemisphere is actually Scorpio in the southern hemisphere. It completely flips to the opposite season. So someone who's born in the season of Taurus, which is the season of Taurus in the northern hemisphere, is actually born in the season of Scorpio here in the southern hemisphere. And that is like a huge shift in now understanding how astrology works and what it means for us in the southern hemisphere. People who actually understand this are a lot of astrologers in Australia, because Australia is also in the southern hemisphere. They have a better understanding of it, but they also, a lot of them are kind of unbothered and not really bothered by being westernized, because, you know, we are the ones that have the problem of living under a colonial system, because colonization for us is oppression, westernization is oppression for us. So it's really important that we're able to decolonize our minds. And I think this is what urged my spirit guides, why they led me to decolonize astrology as well, so that I could understand why we are so misaligned. There's nothing worse than watching people celebrate the wrong things at the wrong time. That is a symptom of a greater illness and a collective illness. When I say the African calendar for me begins with the ancient Dendera, because that was a timekeeping system. That's our original timekeeping system. And that's the original zodiac wheel. But it's more than just about astrology, it's about keeping time. But it's keeping time in a way that is in alignment with nature. Our seasons were based on the astrological houses. That's why I say we have 12 seasons. And then we have 12 months, from January to December. The Roman Empire, the original calendar, before we got to the Gregorian calendar that we have now, when it was the Julian calendar was named after Julius Caesar. The first calendar was a 10-month calendar. It had 10 months. And it began with March, because that's the beginning of their year, and they understood that, right? So we had March, April, May, June, July, August, September, October, November, December, 10. So I'm going to start from March. March was the first month of the year. It's named after the god Mars. It's a Greek-Roman god. April is named after the Greek goddess Aphrodite. May is named after Maya, the goddess Maya. June is named after Juno. July is named after Julius Caesar. So then we have a problem when we get to August, because August was named after Augustus, who was the son of Julius Caesar. So these are things that have nothing to do with us. August, September, the numbers shift, because then personal agendas then came into play, and how he renamed all of the months. But then we had September, October, November, December. These are all named after the numbers and the numerical order of the year. They are completely Western, and they have nothing to do with the way that we understood the months and the seasons to be. We had our own names. There's Sotho names, there's Swati names, like Musunguni names for the months, because the months are actually seasons. But when you look at our Nguni names for those seasons, they describe the natural components of those months and those seasons. So when we talk about the African calendar, we're talking about decolonizing the system of timekeeping, because the names that we call our months have power. The names that we use in general have power. The names that we name our children have power. The words that we use and the way that we speak to each other has power. So it's really important to also know that the way that we speak over our environment and the times that we live in have power. When we're using names that don't resonate with us at all, that renders us powerless over certain aspects of our time and of the place that we're in collectively. Astrology for me is where it was my entry point into understanding decolonization and how to decolonize our way of thinking and our way of perceiving time. The reason that I then I felt this need to kind of reassemble all of this information and to bring it together and compile it into one little space, and it's still a work in progress because we're constantly learning on this journey, and it's a never-ending spiritual journey. But it's just to begin the process of decolonizing at a collective level, because you can decolonize individually, and it's about, your own way of thinking and your own way of behaving and your own way of approaching life. But when we're talking about times of the year and festivals that we engage in and times of the year that we celebrate, that is a collective spiritual energy that we're engaging in. And it's really important for us to do this in a way that means something to us and that returns the power into the way that we speak and the way that we view ourselves and the way that we engage with nature. Because all of these pivotal points of the year, like I was speaking of the equinoxes and the solstices, these are energies, natural energies that we engage in. And this is how we were able to build the most powerful civilizations of all time. It's really important for us to understand and return to our greatness. We talk about returning to our roots all the time. And this is a beautiful thing. And it's a beautiful conversation to be having. But it's really important that we do this with a sense of direction, that we're not just considering the fact that maybe we're wearing cultural attire and we know our clan names or we're learning our clan names. These are beautiful things that we should be doing to engage with the way that our ancestors lived. But because we have been modernized so much, there's some things that, we might not have a natural flow in engaging with those things anymore. But the thing that's really important is that we understand why things were done the way that they were done, so that we're not engaging in nonsensical things that have nothing to do with us, which is an illness that we have and a thing that we need to heal. And we can heal that collectively if we constantly remind each other. And we do that research to know that why do we celebrate Christmas at this time? Why are we celebrating Easter at this time? If we're able to understand those things and we're able to understand the root, then we can begin the process of actually healing collectively and understanding ourselves and remembering who we are. Thank you.